Today we're unboxing an iPhone 4S that should be running its original software version, iOS 5. I found this one on eBay for a really good deal. It was only $22 plus shipping. And what really drew me into this one, aside from it running iOS 5, is the fact that it is in the white color option. Those are just especially hard to find on iOS 5, so I'm really excited to get this opened up. And here is our iPhone 4S. It's looking to be in pretty good condition so far on the front and back, but these sides are absolutely filthy. I'm kind of afraid to even be touching this right now. I have no clue what this black gunk is. So yeah, before I go any further, I need to get this device cleaned up and, more importantly, sanitized. Okay, well, I've now gotten the 4S all cleaned up. I've still got some more cleaning I could do to it, but I wanted to get it powered up to see if it's actually running iOS 5. And okay, it looks like it needs to charge. So I'll get it connected here to the 30-pin cable. And we are getting a really good sign here. This battery icon is indicating iOS 5 or 6. So now I'll just give it some time to charge up and I'll resume the video when it's ready. Okay, well, it's been a few hours now and the 4S is fully charged up. So we'll go ahead and get it disconnected from power, but right away we can definitely tell that this is iOS 5. And the giveaway for that is this lock icon up here in the top center. So Apple only used this through iOS 5 and removed it in iOS 6. But anyway, let's go ahead and slide to unlock. And perfect, we are now met with the iOS 5 home screen. So first off, we'll look at the settings icon. This one is slightly different from what was used in iOS 6. It's a subtle difference, but the gears are slightly different and iOS 6 has a darker outline. Also here we find two Google applications that were removed from iOS 6. So we have the built-in YouTube app here with the old school TV icon as well as the Google Maps. Apple switched to their in-house design maps in iOS 6 and it got a new icon. But now let's jump into settings so we can find out exactly which version of iOS 5 we have. And I believe this has to be either iOS 5.1 or 5.1.1 due to this camera shortcut on the lock screen. With iOS 5.0 and 5.0.1, the camera shortcut was not present all the time. Instead, you would have to double-click the home button to see the shortcut, and it had a slightly different appearance. But anyway, back to the white 4S here, it looks like we have 5.1.1, so the last revision of iOS 5. We can also see that this is an AT&T model and it is the base 16GB capacity. So sadly not the 32 or 64GB, but personally I'm just really excited to have a white 4S on iOS 5. Something about these iPhones with white display bezels are just extra nostalgic for me. So now that we've confirmed this device is running iOS 5, let's just talk about what the iPhone 4S was in general. So this model was announced on October 4th, 2011, and Steve Jobs sadly passed away just one day after on the 5th. And while this model was using the familiar S model upgrade that started back with the iPhone 3GS in 2009, it was still a pretty exciting upgrade, and it was really the last iPhone where the S made sense. So when Apple launched the iPhone 3GS, it was very clear that the S stood for speed, as this model was significantly faster than the previous iPhone 3G. But for the 4S here, S stood for the new Siri voice assistant feature. So this was the very first model to feature that, although there is quite a story to it that we will get into later. The 4S here looked pretty much visually identical to the 2010 iPhone 4. So you had that really premium design with glass on the front and rear and a stainless steel band in the middle. There was an updated antenna design on all models of the 4S here, so it was a symmetrical look with two bands on each side near the bottom and top. That was different from the AT&T model iPhone 4 where there were only 3 bands, one on each side of the bottom and one on the top. However, it was an identical antenna design to the CDMA version of the iPhone 4. So although that all gets really confusing, Apple came out with this CDMA version of the iPhone 4 in early 2011. That model had the updated 4 antenna design to address the antenna gate concerns of the iPhone 4, which, just in case you haven't heard of that, it was a controversy where gripping the iPhone 4 in a certain way would make the signal drop. Steve Jobs himself addressed this in a keynote back in 2010. Basically, they just pushed software updates to kind of change the programming of the signal reporting. They also offered free cases, including the famous bumper case that would help alleviate the issue. But this was always the antenna design that the AT&T iPhone 4 stuck with, while the Verizon models featured the updated one. There were a couple things different about that one. So first off, there was no SIM card tray. And also on the back of the device, there was a simplified look for the FCC labeling. So anyway, that was a really long-winded explanation for that, but I know a lot of people get the iPhone 4S confused with the CDMA model of the iPhone 4. Just of course from that symmetrical antenna design, but you have to look for the SIM card tray, as that gives the device away as definitely being the 4S. For this model, there was no longer a difference for the AT&T versus Verizon, Sprint, and other carriers. Instead, there was just this one model that acted as a world phone. And there were updated internals here, so this device was now powered by the A5 chip that had just launched earlier in the year on the iPad 2. That was a dual-core processor providing a really nice performance bump over the A4 in the iPhone 4. Both models were paired to the same RAM amount with 512 megabytes. One of the biggest areas where Apple was really proud of A5 was in graphics performance. They were quoted to be 7 times faster than what was in the A4, which was great for gameplay on this device. Also, the camera on the 4S got a big improvement, so it was now an 8 megapixel sensor. That was up from a 5 megapixel camera on the iPhone 4. And there were cool new features on the 4S, like the ability to record video in 1080p HD quality. There was also now face detection here, and the capture was 33% faster. Unfortunately, however, the front-facing camera did not get an improvement for this model. So it was still the VGA quality 0.3 megapixel sensor, same as the iPhone 4. That was definitely pretty grainy, but I guess we were still in the early eras of front-facing camera, so it was acceptable. And of course it got the job done for doing things like FaceTiming and taking early selfies. The 4S here also had the same Retina display as the iPhone 4, so that was just a really cool feature if you were upgrading from the 3G or 3GS or even the original iPhone. It was still a 3.5-inch display. This would actually be the last iPhone to have that display size, as we move to the 4-inch display on the iPhone 5. But you really cannot overstate the importance of the Retina display, aside from having a really sharp resolution providing 326 pixels per inch. It also had really nice qualities like being laminated to the cover glass. It was also using IPS technology, so the off-axis viewing angles were excellent. That was in huge contrast to the non-Retina iPhones. So bringing in one of those here for a side-by-side, you can just see how different the resolutions are. Certain fine details here, like say the battery percentage, could definitely appear quite pixelated, which that was definitely not the case for the Retina models. And comparing the viewing angles here, you can see how badly they wash out on the non-Retina display. The whole thing kind of gets a blue or gray tint, and it's just really hard to see. But now let's get back to the discussion of Siri for the 4S. So as I said, this was Apple's new voice assistant. With previous models, they had something kind of similar, although much less intelligent, known as voice control. So voice control here could do basic things like play music or make calls. But that was pretty much it, while Siri was much more full-featured. What many do not know, however, is that Apple did not invent Siri on their own. Siri was initially a third-party application available on the App Store. Apple went on to purchase that application and its technology to build exclusively into the 4S. And that was a bit controversial because the separate Siri application could run on older models. I'll throw in some screenshots now so you can see what that old Siri application looked like. And I'll get this 4S here connected to Wi-Fi so we can try it out. So to invoke Siri, all you have to do is hold down the home button. And here you will see a little splash screen of all the different things it can do. So let's talk to Siri now. Hey Siri, what's up?
I'm painting by numbers. The square root of -1 really pops.
And there we go. As you can see, Siri is still working on iOS 5, which is really cool. Its first built-in iteration. And as you can see, it also kind of has a sense of humor. Despite all of the really helpful and productive things Siri could do, I definitely remember it being popular to joke around with it. So you could say something really crazy like, I need to hide a body.
Very funny.
And she would kind of play around with that. Tell me a joke.
Why do hummingbirds hum?
Although there were some limitations on this early version, so it couldn't do things like open applications. Open the camera.
If you update to the latest version of iOS, I'll be able to help you with that.
Okay, and as you can see, it is wanting me to update to do that, which we will definitely not be doing. But yeah, there was a quick look at Siri. I'm going to get this device disconnected from Wi-Fi now, just in case it would kind of try and automatically update. As we know today, Siri has almost turned into a joke with the whole Apple Intelligence controversy. But at least we can still look back at the first version of Siri here, where everything was still really lighthearted and fun. I remember back in 2011, a couple of my family members got this 4S, and it was just so cool to play around with. It really felt like something from the future to have your phone speaking back to you. And a few more points about the 4S here. This was the last design to have a headphone jack on the top, and it was the last to have the old 30-pin connector. As the following year's iPhone 5 would move the headphone jack to the bottom and bring the new Lightning connector. There was also a new top-tier storage configuration for the 4S, so you were no longer limited to 16 or 32 gigabytes. Instead, you could go up to 64 gigabytes, which was just huge at the time. This launched at the typical carrier subsidized price of $199, and you could get it in black or white from launch. That was different from the iPhone 4, where the white color was delayed all the way until early 2011. The 4S had a really good reputation. It was a super solid smartphone at the time. Although the display size was getting to be a little bit small, especially compared to the Android competition. I remember the Samsung Galaxy S3, which came out in early 2012, was a huge competitor to the 4S. So if I remember correctly, the display here was 4.8 inches, which just towered over the 4S. And it made that device more appealing, especially for doing things like watching movies and videos. This Galaxy S3 is actually running its original version of Android here, so let me know if you guys would like to see a video about this. But although the 4S was really positively reviewed at launch, it didn't age too well. So Apple continued selling the 16 gigabyte capacity at a discounted price when the iPhone 5 released. It was still a pretty good choice then for $100 less than the 5. However, in 2013, Apple created a new base configuration with 8 gigabytes for this model. That model was free with a 2-year contract, and it launched with iOS 7. The software itself ran pretty well on this model, but 8 gigabytes was really just too small at the time. And performance for the 4S really began dwindling in 2014 when iOS 8 came out. So at that point, all of the animations and transparency were a little bit taxing on the A5 chip. And especially when Apple decided to support the 4S all the way through iOS 9 in 2015, performance was really just screeching to a halt. It was so bad that some users of the 4S on iOS 9 actually filed a lawsuit against Apple. And if I remember correctly, Apple did pay out some small amount to them through the settlement. Also, for a window of time, Apple was signing iOS 6.1.3 for this device. You can still downgrade to that version if you have one of these that has been updated, but it's a little bit more of a process. But anyway, with the history of the 4S out of the way, let's turn our attention to iOS 5 on this device specifically. So although it may not come across on the surface, iOS 5 was really a huge upgrade. One of the biggest revolutions it brought was iCloud. So this would enable really seamless syncing of all of your content across every Apple device you owned. So that was a huge step Apple took toward creating an ecosystem of their devices. Before iCloud, Apple tried something called Mobile Me, although that was a paid service and it really was not successful at all. I'm pretty sure in the iCloud keynote, Steve Jobs himself referred to Mobile Me as not our finest hour. But that iCloud keynote would end up being the last one that Steve Jobs would appear in. Also new for iOS 5 and kind of going along with iCloud was iMessage. So that was Apple's all-new message platform that was available on Wi-Fi. This was especially a breakthrough for iPod Touch and iPad users, as you could message anyone with an Apple device running iOS 5 using only your email address and a Wi-Fi network. Of course, iMessage brought the whole blue bubble and the supremacy that comes along with that we still find today. It also brought read and delivered receipts as well as the ability to see when the other user was typing. Another huge aspect where iOS 5 was revolutionary was the notification system. So there was now a notification center available with just a swipe. That was really nice because this was not present in iOS 4, so it was really easy to lose your notifications. There was also something new called a banner style notification, which would come down from the top of the device and not require immediate action. Instead, you could kind of swipe it away or it would just naturally go away after a certain amount of time. And that was really nice because with iOS 4, they would come up right in the center of your screen and require immediate action. Also new for iOS 5 was on-device setup and over-the-air software updates. So no longer did you need to connect your iPhone to iTunes on your computer to do the initial activation. That was a pretty big inconvenience with iOS 4 and below. Also at the time, mobile devices were becoming more and more common and some users would have one but not have a computer. So it was really important that these devices could start acting independently. And just a few more small points about iOS 5, the iPod app that was present on iOS 4 and below was now split into music and videos. There was also a new reminders application as well as a little newsstand folder. And there was now a more rounded look for the toggles compared to the squared off look with iOS 4 and below. Now we'll take a look here at the built-in wallpapers for iOS 5. Of course, the water droplets here are the default, although this was also the default image for iOS 4. But otherwise, there is a really nice selection. There are 27 here to choose from. We have nice classic choices like the globe image that was synonymous with the original iPhone. And plenty of other nostalgic and skeuomorphic choices. I love this denim image here. I feel like this is a choice that Steve Jobs would probably go with, but I also really like this peacock feather here. I feel like it's great for showing off the quality of the Retina display. But I think for this device here, I'm just going to leave the default. I think it looks especially nice with the white bezel. And finally, although this device did not include its original box, I still wanted to show you what accessories would have been included. So first off, we have the literature packet here. This includes a pretty detailed quick start guide as well as warranty info and 2 Apple stickers. So let's take a closer look at the quick start guide here. As you can see, this was showing you not only how to use the iPhone itself, but also the software. So it's especially cool here to look at iMessage as well as the notifications and Siri. And here's a look at the back of that quick start guide. I think this is just so cool. I love how Apple used to include all of this. And for the accessories themselves, we have a small 5-watt power adapter as well as a 30-pin to USB cable. And we have these little earbuds here. Now these were a pretty low point because they are notoriously very uncomfortable in the ear. Apple moved on to the EarPods design with the iPhone 5 and those were significantly better. But yeah, that pretty much concludes my look at this iPhone 4S running iOS 5.1.1. This is a particularly nostalgic device for me, and as I said, I'm just really excited to finally have one in the white color. I have quite a few of these in the black color, but the white is just so much harder to find. This specific 4S here is actually a demo model that I covered in a previous video. So this one's especially cool to take a look at. We have the old school Twitter app here, as well as some of the Apple applications here like iMovie. And I also like taking a look at Temple Run here. This has a splash screen about being developed specifically for the demo model. So here is a look at that. And really quick, for one more thing, I want to show you what cover flow looks like on this device. So really cool how in the music app you can just quickly browse through your albums with this. But yeah, be sure to leave me a comment below with your thoughts on the iPhone 4S. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.